By the time my ex-girlfriend acquired my company, my artificial heart was already on the verge of collapse. I couldn't hold on much longer. She was the heiress to the prestigious Astor family of New York, while I was just an ordinary guy from a modest background. We were from two different worlds, yet we met when we were young and it was love at first sight. We went from college sweethearts to discussing marriage, but my background was no match for the Astor family's pedigree, so her parents intervened forcefully. But Chloe loved me. For me, she was willing to break ties with her family, even giving up her inheritance. She struck out on her own, vowing to build an empire by herself, so that one day she could proudly marry the boy she loved into the Astor family. But tragedy struck before her dream could be realized. In her rush to build a life for us, Chloe worked herself to the bone and was diagnosed with heart failure, her life hanging by a thread. Devastated, I scrambled to find doctors and searched everywhere for a donor heart, but nothing came of it. Just as I was losing all hope, the hospital informed me that the tissue matching test I had taken behind Chloe's back was a success. Looking at the love of my life fading away on that hospital bed, with doctors issuing one critical condition notice after another, I made a desperate decision. I would give my heart to Chloe and take a newly developed artificial one for myself. I knew she would never agree if she found out the truth, so I orchestrated an elaborate deception. I hired a woman to pretend to be my lover and made sure Chloe would find out. As she confronted me, heartbroken, I put on a mask of indifference and spewed cruel taunts. I'm young and good-looking. I have plenty of rich heiresses chasing after me. Chloe, I was only with you in the beginning because of your status. But now you've turned your back on the Astor family for me. You're powerless, broke, and you've even got heart failure. You could drop dead at any second. Of course, I have to think about my own future and find my next sugar mama. Honestly, you're the 28th woman I've slept with this month. If you really love me, then have some pity and don't stand in the way of my happiness. That was the first time I ever saw Chloe cry. Her eyes were red as she wept, and before she left, she said only one thing, "Ethan, you are heartless." Chloe was admitted to the hospital that night, where they issued 7 critical condition notices. Meanwhile, I went under the knife anonymously, gave her my heart, received the artificial one, and moved to a different city to start over. 5 years passed in a blur. Chloe had truly made a name for herself. She was successful, had reconciled with her family, and was now the CEO of the Astor Group. She also had a new fiancé, Julian Croft, the heir to the Croft Corporation. Somehow, she found out where I was and acquired my small company, absorbing it into her conglomerate. And just like that, by a cruel twist of fate, I was back in her life, working as her personal secretary. I knew she was doing all of this for revenge, but I offered no explanation. The artificial heart had a 5-year lifespan at best. My time was running out. Telling her the truth now would only cause more suffering. She once loved me so fiercely, showing me the greatest love I had ever known. Now, it was my turn to bear all the pain, so she could have a life of peace and success. The bottles of liquor on the table emptied one by one, but Chloe just watched me, her expression cold and unmoved. Then her phone rang. The moment she saw the caller ID, the frost on her face melted. "I'll be right there," she said warmly. She stood up, still murmuring into the phone, but as she reached the door, she heard a sudden noise behind her. After downing the last bottle, my body gave out. I violently coughed up a pool of blood, a searing pain tearing through my insides, so intense that tears streamed down my face. Through a watery haze, I saw Chloe rush back to me, grabbing me in a frantic embrace. Her voice trembled. "What's wrong? Why is there so much blood?" Seeing the fear in her eyes, I remembered the time I was quarantined with pneumonia, and how she had intentionally gotten sick just so she could be in the hospital with me. I knew how extreme she could be, which was why I could never let her know the truth. I forced a smirk onto my face. "Aren't you getting married? Weren't you just rushing off to be with your fiancé? All I had to do was put on a little show, and you came running right back? This isn't blood, it's stage blood. Ha ha ha. Chloe, don't you feel pathetic? After 5 years, you still care about me." I laughed so hard that tears streamed down my face, making it clear to anyone watching that I was genuinely mocking and trampling on her feelings. The atmosphere in the room turned ice cold. Chloe shoved me away, her face dark with rage, and flipped the coffee table over. The liquor bottles, targets of her fury, shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stared down at me, her patience gone. "I just want to keep you chained by my side and watch what kind of karma a faithless bastard like you gets." With that, she and her entourage stormed out. As I watched her retreating figure, the theatrical smirk fell from my face, and I closed my eyes in despair. I clenched my jaw, careful not to make a single sound that might make her turn back. Only one thought remained. I needed Chloe to hate me forever. That way, when I die, she won't shed a single tear for me. Took a long while for me to regain some of my strength. I didn't get home until late, where I placed the money she'd given me into a safe. It held millions by now, all payment for the revenge Chloe had exacted on me over the past year. I planned to donate it all to charity before I died. After putting everything away, a dense, gnawing pain spread through my chest, like something was eating me from the inside. I quickly swallowed a handful of pills, but perhaps because of the alcohol, the pain didn't subside in the slightest. I could do nothing but clutch the sweat-drenched sheets, my nails breaking until my fingertips were a bloody mess. My head was foggy. I would drift off for a few minutes only to be jolted awake by the pain again. In that state between sleep and consciousness, I dreamed. I dreamed that Chloe rented out all of Disneyland, setting off fireworks all night just to celebrate our 100-day anniversary. I dreamed of how she learned to knit from scratch, just like all the other girls were doing for their boyfriends, painstakingly creating a scarf that was uniquely hers. I dreamed she would drive me down to Big Sur, and as the sun set over the mountains, she would gently kiss the corner of my lips. Back then, she was a vibrant young woman, and the way she looked at me was filled with an immeasurable, profound love. But that was all in the past. When I woke, I stared at my tear-soaked pillow, sitting alone and silent in the long, quiet night. The next day, my request for time off was denied, so I had to drag my aching body to work. I was called into her office the moment I arrived. When I opened the door, I saw Chloe with her arm around Julian's waist. They were kissing passionately, acting as if they hadn't noticed me at all. I stood there, frozen, watching them as my fingers curled into tight fists. It felt like a heavy weight was crushing my heart, leaving it scarred and battered. I don't know how much time passed before they finally broke their kiss. Chloe held him close, gently rubbing his leg. Her voice was softer than a spring breeze. "Julian, you're getting better at this. You remembered to breathe." Julian blushed and playfully slapped her arm, his voice shy. "Well, you've taught me enough times. I'd have to be a slow learner not to improve." Chloe chuckled, then bent down to put his shoe back on and smooth out the wrinkles in his shirt. Then, she helped him to his feet, her eyes finally landing on me standing silently by the door. Her tone turned icy again. "Julian wants to go skydiving. He needs someone to go with him. You're perfect for the job." Chloe knew perfectly well that I had a crippling fear of heights. On top of that, with my artificial heart, an extreme sport like this was a death sentence. I looked up at her, saying nothing. When I remained silent, Chloe threw a stack of cash at my chest. A flicker of some complex emotion crossed her face. "Well," I put on my usual smile, bent down to pick up the money, and stuffed it in my pocket. "Of course not. Getting paid this much just to jump out of a plane? It's a great deal for me." At my words, Chloe's expression grew even colder. She took Julian's hand and walked out. On the plane, at 10,000 feet, everything below looked impossibly small. The hatch opened. I forced myself to stand as a biting wind rushed in, making me shudder. Beside me, Julian looked down and paled, shrinking into Chloe's arms with tears in his eyes. "Chloe, I'm scared. I don't want to jump." Chloe glanced over at my ashen face, and to my surprise, she seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Okay," she said, "we won't jump. Let's go down." Hearing that, I immediately reached for the buckles on my parachute. But a second later, Julian spoke again. "I'm not jumping, but I want to watch him. Chloe, will you push him out yourself?" For a moment, both Chloe and I were stunned into silence. Julian clung to her arm, whining. "I know about your past with him. I know how deep you were in. Even though you're broken up, and you've told me 100 times that I'm the only one for you now, I need you to prove it to me again today. You push him, and I'll finally believe that you don't love him anymore. Please." Chloe's hand clenched into a fist, veins popping on the back, but then it relaxed just as quickly. She suppressed whatever she was feeling, looked at me, and said in a voice devoid of warmth, "Come here." The blood had drained from my face. Like a puppet on a string, I moved stiffly to the edge of the open door. The moment her long fingers touched my shoulders, I thought my heart would pound its way out of my chest. The next second, a hard shove sent me plummeting toward the earth below. The change in pressure and the sheer terror made me clench my jaw. I forced myself to stay calm, replaying the instructor's words in my head. From 10,000 feet to 5,000, then 3, then 1. The moment the parachute opened, I couldn't hold it back any longer and coughed up a mouthful of blood. The droplets atomized in the wind, a crimson mist falling like rain. My already frayed composure shattered completely, and the relentless, Stabbing pain in my chest was an agony worse than death. I took my medication and rested for a long time before the staff escorted me from the landing zone. I saw Chloe and Julian waiting in a car. As the door opened, Julian gasped, "Your shirt is covered in blood." Chloe's head snapped up. For a second, I saw a flicker of concern in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold indifference. "More of your theatrics. Ethan, I won't fall for your pathetic tricks again." She covered Julian's eyes with her hand and pulled him close. "Don't look. It's disgusting." Then she slammed the car door and told the driver to go. Watching the car disappear down the road, I gave a bitter laugh. My last ounce of strength vanished and I collapsed. My hands shaking, I tried to call a car, but we were too far out in the middle of nowhere. I had no choice but to sit on the side of the road and wait for a kind soul to offer me a ride. Soon, the sky opened up and a heavy rain began to fall, soaking me to the skin. The cold seeped into my already aching body, and a pain so sharp it felt like my bones were cracking shot through me, causing me to tremble uncontrollably. My tears mixed with the rain, falling silently into the mud. I sat in the downpour for 3 hours before I finally managed to flag down a car. By the time I got home, I had a raging fever. My body felt heavy as lead, and my night was filled with nightmares. Luckily, it was the weekend, so I had 2 days to recover. I spent those 2 days in bed, drifting in and out of a feverish sleep, suffering alone. On Monday, the 8 o'clock alarm went off. I dragged myself out of bed, quickly put on some makeup to hide how sick I was, and got to the office on time. I was stopped at the door by Julian. "Go down to 5th Avenue and get me an iced coffee. I want it here in 20 minutes. The cafe was over a mile away. Including the time it would take to make it, I had no choice but to run. By the time I got back to the office with the coffee, I was out of breath, and my makeup couldn't hide my exhausted, pale face. Julian saw me, clung to Chloe's arm, and doubled over with laughter. "Look at him. He looks like a drowned rat. So pathetic." Chloe glanced at me, patting Julian's back comfortingly. "He does," she agreed absently. A sharp pain pierced my racing heart, as if I'd been stabbed with a needle. With a trembling hand, I set the coffee down and returned to my desk. The next day, Julian threw his watch into the decorative pond in the lobby and made me fish it out. I spent 10 hours in that freezing water before I finally found it. When I brought it to her penthouse, Chloe was just coming out of the bedroom. She was dressed in a crisp white shirt and black slacks, her posture perfect, but her collarbone was covered in dark bruises. She tossed 2 stacks of cash at me, her voice languid. "Julian is exhausted. He's sleeping. Go and clean him up. We're out of the things on the nightstand. Remember to buy more on your way out." I lowered my gaze and, after a long moment, nodded. I walked into the bedroom, the air still thick with intimacy. Seeing the mess on the floor and Julian asleep in the bed, my breath caught in my throat. I looked down at my own hands, pale and wrinkled from the water, and slowly began to pick up the discarded items, cleaning the room. A bitter sting filled my nose and my eyes began to burn, but I forced it all down, refusing to show a single crack in my facade. After a full week of this torment, I finally had a 2-day break. On Friday night, just as I got home, Chloe sent me an address via iMessage. I dragged my aching body to the location and picked her up. She was drunk. After I got her back to her penthouse, I was about to leave and call a car, but she grabbed my hand. Her tall frame loomed over me in the confined space of the car, and I shrank back into the corner. She had everything now: success, fame, a handsome fiancé, but when she looked at me, all I could see was pain. Her drunken eyes stared at me, her hot breath on my face. "Ethan," she slurred, "all these years, have you ever had any regrets? Have you ever, for even a single second, thought about her?" But she didn't say the words out loud. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly recovered, forcing a lazy smile. "Regrets? Of course I have regrets. If I'd married you, imagine how much money I'd have to burn. I'd be the one making Julian fetch my coffee, find my watches. He loves you so much, doesn't he? What do you think he'd do if he saw you with me, taking care of me? Would he get jealous?" With every word, Chloe's expression grew darker. She threw the car door open, her voice thick with rage as she pointed outside. I did as she wished. After a night's rest, I received an invitation to a college reunion. Realizing this might be the last time I'd ever see my old classmates, I went, despite feeling unwell. As soon as I entered the private room, I saw Chloe and Julian. They were tasting wine, whispering intimately to each other. After a while, Chloe took off her own jacket and draped it over Julian's shoulders, then took his hands in hers to warm them. When people came by to offer them drinks, Chloe would take Julian's glass and drink it for him. Old classmates who hadn't seen each other in years mingled, catching up on each other's lives. Everyone tacitly ignored me, and I said nothing, finding a quiet corner where I could watch the happy couple from a distance. Later, they started playing a game. Not many people wanted to join, so the organizer dragged me into it. I lost the first round. The winners looked at each other, then smirked at me. "Tell us about the last time you got laid." The room erupted in catcalls and laughter. My expression froze for a second before I smoothed it back to neutral. In my memory, the last time had been 6 years ago with Chloe. She had just been diagnosed with heart failure. With tears in her eyes, she had insisted on taking walks with me, talking for hours. At the end of that day, she had buried her face in my neck, her voice raspy. "My love, I've transferred all my assets to your name. It's not much, but it's everything I have. If I die, don't do anything stupid. Forget me. Find someone who loves you and live a good life. When you're an old man, then you can come find me. I'll be waiting for you at the gates of the afterlife, and we can cross over together." Even now, the memory of that moment was a heart-wrenching pain. But now, she was sitting right there, watching me with a cold expression. I forced a smile and began to lie. "The last time? About a week ago. There was this older woman, said she'd give me $3 million if I liked her back. So I did. She might be older, but she's surprisingly romantic. She treats me well, takes care of me, we go shopping together, you know?" The look of pure enjoyment on my face as I spoke was like a knife twisting in Chloe's heart. She crushed the wine glass in her hand, her voice shaking with rage. "Ethan, have you no shame?" The entire room fell silent. I calmly picked up my glass of juice and gave her a small smile. "Why should I be? Money's money, no matter how you earn it." Chloe looked as if the blood had frozen in her veins. She seemed to be struggling to breathe. Unable to take any more, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Seeing the strange looks everyone was giving me, I lost the will to continue the charade. I calmly stood up and left as well. As I reached the exit, Julian called out my name. I ignored him and kept walking. A moment later, he caught up to me, grabbing my arm and slapping me hard across the face. "Are you deaf? Or are you just feeling smug because you realized Chloe still cares about you?" I touched my stinging cheek, a humorless smile on my face. "That's right, I'm thrilled. Can you believe how foolishly devoted she is? 5 years, and she's still hung up on me like an idiot." A series of emotions flashed across Julian's face. Anger, resentment, disgust, and finally, cold fury. He glanced over his shoulder, then pulled a small knife from his pocket. Before I could react, he sliced off a lock of my hair. Just then, Chloe returned from the restroom. Julian ran to her, his eyes red with fake tears, and sobbed, "Chloe, I was just trying to tell him to be more careful, and he got furious and slapped me. He even pulled out my hair." Chloe could see immediately that the lock of hair had been cut, not pulled, and there was no red mark on Julian's face. But when she saw the smirk on my face, her anger flared. She called over her bodyguards, cut off all his hair, then slap him 10 times as an apology to Julian. The bodyguards didn't hesitate. One of them sheared my hair off at the scalp, and then they slapped me hard 10 times. I didn't resist. I kept my head bowed so no one could see the look in my eyes. When the last slap landed, I finally raised my head, my face swollen and bleeding. "Is that enough? Goodbye, Ms. Astor." Then, with my newly buzzed head, I walked away. Outside the bar, I took out my phone to call a car. Just as I booked one, my heart lurched, and for some reason, I looked up. In the next instant, I saw a car careening out of control, heading straight for me. It was too close. I had no time to move before the impact sent me flying. I landed hard on the pavement, the sharp pain of breaking bones spreading through me. Blood poured from my wounds, quickly covering my face. I gasped for breath, my vision blurring. Faintly, I could hear someone calling my name. The voice was so familiar, yet it sounded so far away. I felt like I was in a long dream. When I woke up, the first thing I smelled was antiseptic. I forced my eyes open and saw a doctor in a white coat standing by my bed, speaking gravely to Chloe. "Ms. Astor, the patient has had prior surgery. The artificial heart in his body is nearing the end of its operational life." He was only halfway through his sentence when I cut him off. With the last of my strength, I rasped, "Doctor, she's not as gullible as she used to be. The deal we discussed is off. I'm done lying to her. I'll still send you the money I promised." My voice was so sharp and raw that it completely drowned out the doctor. Chloe, who had been distracted, hadn't quite heard the doctor, but she heard me, and her expression twisted with disgust. Ethan, you really are incorrigible. What game are you playing now? I let out a weak laugh. Isn't it obvious? I bribed the doctor to tell you I was sick so I could squeeze some money out of you. Now that I see you're not falling for it, I'm giving up. Chloe's face was a mask of pure fury. Ethan, she said, her voice dripping with contempt before she turned and left. Loving you was the greatest shame of my life. As I watched her walk away, I closed my eyes, which were suddenly wet with tears. The doctor, confused, hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should continue. Then he heard my weak, tired voice. Doctor, how much time do I have left? You might have had a few more weeks, but your condition is deteriorating rapidly. A week at most. I nodded silently. 1 week. I suppose I should start getting my affairs in order. The next day, against medical advice, I checked myself out of the hospital. With no family left, I took my identification and medical records and went to the county clerk's office to arrange for my legal affairs to be settled upon my death. Just as I was leaving, I ran into Chloe. Julian was holding her hand, his voice filled with excitement. Once we get our passports updated, we can go to Europe for our honeymoon, then the Americas, and finish in Australia. Do you think that's too long? Chloe didn't seem to be paying attention until she spotted me. Then, a smile spread across her face as she wrapped her arm around Julian's shoulder. I promised you the day we got together that I'd always listen to you. Wherever you want to go, I'll go with you. To the ends of the earth. Julian beamed, but then he saw me and his expression changed. Ethan, what are you doing here? My plan to slip away unnoticed was ruined. I turned and nodded to them, just passing through. Ms. Astor, Mr. Croft. What a coincidence. I said it casually, but Chloe's eyes were fixed on the papers in my hand, her expression telling me she didn't believe me. She was about to question me, but Julian cut her off. Perfect timing. I'm going shopping. You can carry my bags. A moment later, Chloe opened the car door, her face a cold mask. I said nothing and got in. During the drive, the two of them chatted endlessly. Chloe, what do you think about having the wedding in a castle? I want to wear a tuxedo with tails, and you have to let me see the ring before you buy it. I like sapphires. All right, I'll have my people start scouting castle locations immediately. I've already contacted several international designers for the gown, and the ring is being designed now. You'll get the sketches in a few days to choose from. Listening to her patiently discuss the wedding details, I felt my mind begin to drift. We had been so close to getting married once. I had picked out a venue, a suit, a ring. She was just starting her business then, so I didn't want to spend too much. I chose modest options for everything, but when she found out, she vetoed all of it. She took time out of her insane schedule to help me choose again, telling me, "My love, I'm only going to have one wedding in my entire life, and you are going to be my only groom. Your only job is to think about how we can make memories that we'll still be talking about when we're 80. Don't worry about the cost." In that moment, I could almost see it, an 80-year-old Chloe, sitting beside me, looking through our wedding album. A future that once seemed so close was now just an illusion. But it was all right. I was the only one who wouldn't get a happy ending. Chloe would have her bright future, her happy family, and a long, peaceful life. And I would watch over her from the afterlife, praying for her happiness and peace. Julian dragged me around the mall for 5 hours, finding new ways to torment me. He made me try on dozens of pairs of shoes until my heels were raw and bleeding. Then he complained his legs were sore and made me kneel and massage them for 2 hours. After that, he took me to a Szechuan restaurant, ordered a table full of the spiciest dishes, and forced me to eat every last bite. Seeing me speechless from the heat but still forcing myself to eat, Julian shot a triumphant look at Chloe. Chloe, I don't want to waste food, but your secretary looks like he's in pain. Maybe we should let him stop. Chloe pursed her lips, gently brushing a stray hair from Julian's forehead. He can handle spicy food, she said coolly. He's just putting on an act. Don't feel sorry for him. I used to love spicy food, but after the artificial heart, I switched to a bland diet to prolong my life. Now, with only days left, I couldn't afford to let my mask slip. I forced myself to swallow every last bite. After the last bite, I clutched my chest, which felt like it was on fire. My face was flushed, and my stomach was churning violently. The pain was so bad that I broke out in a cold sweat. I excused myself to the restroom and made myself throw up. I retched until all that came up was bile and acid. I stared at the shocking red in the toilet bowl before flushing it away, my face expressionless. Swallowing the taste of blood, I steadied myself against the wall and walked out to find Julian waiting impatiently. Chloe, standing next to him, frowned when she saw how pale I was. She started to say something, but her phone rang. There was an emergency at the office. That left just me and Julian, but he wasn't done with me yet. He led me into a lingerie store. My eyes flickered as I took in the racks of colorful lingerie. Julian grabbed an armful of silk nightgowns and threw them at me. "Try these on. I want to see." My first instinct was to refuse, but then Julian picked up his phone and sent a voice message to Chloe. "Chloe, the second you leave, your secretary stops listening to me." A moment later, my phone rang. It was Chloe. "Julian is my fiancé. As my secretary, you will do everything he asks of you without question. Do you understand?" Hearing her sharp tone, I stood in silence for a long moment before Julian's impatient urging finally pushed me into the dressing room. When I came out wearing one of the nightgowns, Julian sneered, "Figures. You're probably used to wearing things like this, being kept by a woman and all." He glanced around, noticing other customers staring. An idea lit up his face. He had the sales clerk lead me out to the main floor of the department store. "Since you model it so well, you can be a living mannequin for them. I'll give you $10,000 for every one you sell today." My fingernails dug into my palms. The rumors about me being a kept man were just lies I'd invented to deceive Chloe. It was one thing to lie about it, but to actually stand here, in front of all these people, wearing this was a humiliation I couldn't bear. Faced with the leering stares, the jeers, and the phones raised to take pictures, I lowered my head in shame. Every second was an eternity of torment. I could only tell myself that it didn't matter. Soon I'd be dead, and none of this would matter anymore. Soon, photos and videos of me were all over the internet, even trending on Twitter. A crowd gathered to gawk, and their comments grew more and more vulgar. In the middle of the day, too. Have some shame. Is this some TikToker trying to go viral? Look at him. Does he look like he's being forced? I think he's enjoying the attention. Julian watched the scene unfold, looking pleased. He had one of his assistants throw a wad of cash at me. The crowd went wild, surging forward to grab the money. In the chaos, I was knocked to the ground. Several men fell on top of me, their hands all over my body. The feeling of their sweaty hands on my skin made my stomach turn. They left bruises on my pale skin, and my already broken fingernails bled. I struggled, but it was no use. Tears streamed down my face. Just as I was about to give up hope, Chloe burst through the crowd. Her eyes were wild. She pulled the men off me and started throwing punches. The crowd screamed as security guards finally arrived to restore order. After she had dealt with the men, Chloe grabbed me by the arm, her face grim, and dragged me out of the store. Her grip was so tight I thought she would break my arm. I struggled to keep up with her long strides, my heart pounding, until I finally yanked my arm free. When I turned to face her, her expression was murderous. "Ethan," she roared, "do you have to degrade yourself like this?" Seeing the mixture of hatred and pain in her eyes, I felt a bone-deep chill, as if my heart had been pierced by ice. The air between us froze. A moment later, Julian came running up, grabbing Chloe's hand. His voice was thick with crocodile tears. "Chloe," I told him it was too revealing, but he insisted. He said he liked showing off his body, that he enjoyed the attention. "Enough!" Chloe cut him off, her voice sharp. It was the first time Julian had ever seen her this angry at him. He bit his lip, his eyes welling with tears, and turned away. I watched this little drama play out, then let a triumphant smile spread across my face. "I did it willingly. So what? Don't you think this color suits me? You're the one who came charging in here and assaulted my fans. You have no idea how much money you just cost me." Chloe's jaw worked, and her knuckles turned white as she clenched her fists. I looked her straight in the eye and continued my taunts. "Ms. Astor, you ditched your fiancé to stay here with me. Are you falling for me too? Give me $1 million and I'm all yours." The fury in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by a chilling mix of disappointment, disgust, and cold, hard indifference. For a moment, it looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She just stared at me and laughed, a cold, bitter sound. As she laughed, her eyes began to redden. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. After she was gone, I collapsed to my knees. I felt a deep, penetrating cold in my skin, in my bones, in my very heart. The clouds parted and the afternoon sun shone down, but I felt no warmth at all. On Monday, I arrived at the office on time, but my key card wouldn't work. I tried it several times, but the screen just read "Access denied." I pulled out my phone, and when I opened our company's group chat, I saw that I had been removed. Surprised, I messaged HR. They sent back a screenshot of a message from Chloe, announcing my termination. I froze for a second, then felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had been planning to resign today anyway. I sent another message to the HR manager, asking to meet him. We met at a coffee shop. I slid a small box across the table. "Could you please give this to Ms. Astor for me?" He looked surprised. "What is it?" My gaze unfocused for a moment as memories flooded my mind. It was an heirloom from Chloe's grandmother, meant for her future husband. Chloe had put it around my neck the day she told me she loved me, and I hadn't taken it off in 7 years. I had wanted to return it after the surgery, but her family had whisked her away, and I never got the chance. I kept it as a memento. Now that I was truly leaving for good, it was time to return it. When I didn't answer, he didn't press, but he did offer a quiet warning. "Ethan, for what it's worth, I heard it was Mr. Croft's decision to let you go. I'll find a chance to give her the box, but whatever happens after that is out of my hands." I understood what he was implying and nodded. After a few more pleasantries, I hailed a cab. As the car pulled away, I rolled down the window and saw Chloe in the distance. She was holding Julian, smoothing his wind-tousled hair, a warm smile on her face. Julian, in turn, straightened her collar and gave her a light kiss. The cab driver saw them too and muttered, "Newlyweds, so in love." His casual words felt like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked away. Back home, I took out a box and began to pack. The gifts Chloe had given me, her love letters, the matching couples items we'd bought together. I had kept them all for years, taking them out from time to look at. This would be the last time. I looked at each item, unable to bring myself to put it in the box. I didn't finish until after dark. I dragged the box to the curb, and as I was about to leave it there, I looked up and saw Chloe. She was leaning against her car, watching me. The necklace in her hand glinted in the darkness. "The heirloom I gave you, you kept it. If you kept it this long, why would a money grubber like you be willing to give it back?" I took a few steps forward, blocking the box from her view. "It's valuable, sure," I said casually. "But it was your grandmother's, wasn't it? Things left behind by the dead are bad luck. I didn't want it anymore." My words hit their mark. "After everything you've done," she shot back, "what could you possibly be afraid of? Clingy exes," I said, "especially the kind who can't let go. Bad for my dating life." Hearing my words, Chloe looked as if she regretted ever coming here. She turned, got into her car, and slammed the door. After she was gone, I threw the box into the dumpster. I spent the next 2 days at home, slowly emptying my apartment. After I had gotten rid of everything, I went to the bank and donated all the money I had to a charity for underprivileged schools. When I walked out of the bank, I looked at the bustling city streets and felt a profound sense of peace. I walked down to the riverfront. My legs felt weak, so I sat down to rest. Suddenly, Julian was there, standing over me, his expression unreadable. "Don't you love money? I'll give you $30 million. Take it and leave New York. Disappear for good. How about it?" I shook my head, a careless smile on my face. "Don't worry, Mr. Croft. I'll be leaving soon enough." He didn't believe me, thinking I was just playing hard to get. $50 million, he said, raising the offer. 70. 100 million. I refused every offer. Julian's patience finally snapped. He grabbed me by the collar. "Don't push your luck. Ethan, if you won't take the money, then you can just die." He roared and shoved me. I was so weak that I tumbled over the railing. As I fell, I saw Chloe running towards us, her face a mask of terror. For a split second, I felt like I was 18 again, healthy, vibrant, able to catch the love of my life as she ran into my arms. But my life was on a countdown now. I didn't struggle. I let the current take me. I thought I must be dead. My soul felt weightless. But when I opened my eyes, I saw Chloe's anxious face, and I knew I was still alive. My body ached as if it were about to fall apart, and my racing heart sent a feverish flush to my pale cheeks. Chloe reached out to touch my forehead, but I turned my head away. I saw her hand freeze in midair. I let out a hot breath. "Your fiancé has a terrible temper. I told him to give me 100 million and I'd disappear from your lives forever. He refused and had the nerve to yell at me. I tried to slap some sense into him, but he dodged. A real shame." Chloe's expression hardened. "Ethan, are you that desperate for money?" "Of course. I have a dozen young models on my payroll. I have to work hard to keep them happy. You have no idea what it's like to be with women in their early 20s. They make me feel 18 again." My casual lies made a vein throb in Chloe's forehead. She finally snapped. "Are you that desperate for women? Ethan, look at what you've become. Don't you disgust yourself?" I managed a weak smile. Haven't you ever heard life is short, play hard? I have money, why shouldn't I enjoy it with beautiful young women? Or should I be like you, and waste it all on a man like me only to end up with nothing? Chloe, let's be honest. We were never meant to be. You're a romantic. I only love money. I had to work so hard to pretend to be the man you wanted. And you were so naive, ready to give up everything for me. You have no idea how many times I wanted you to go back to your family. I would have been your secret lover, your kept man, anything. As long as you paid me, I didn't care about a title. I had it all planned out. When you got tired of me, we'd go our separate ways. You'd get married, and I'd find a new patron. But then you had to go and get sick. And you didn't even have the decency to die. I wasted 7 years of my life on you for nothing. I regret every second of it. Any lingering tenderness Chloe might have felt for our past was shattered by my words. She stared at me in disbelief, searching for any trace of the man she once knew, but all she saw was a mercenary, hateful stranger. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she closed her eyes, as if making a final decision. Fine, she said. From this moment on, you and I are done. We will go our separate ways, and we will never see each other again. A wide smile spread across my face. As she walked away, I began to laugh, a wild, unrestrained sound that continued until my lungs burned for air. A sweet, metallic taste filled my mouth, and then I was coughing up blood. The heart monitor began to scream. Terrified that the sound would bring her back, I did one last thing before death took me. I ripped the sensors from my chest. Then I lay back down. Chloe, it looks like I'll be the one waiting for you at the gates after all. A small smile touched my lips as I closed my eyes for the last time. Chloe's mind was in turmoil after she left the hospital. One moment, she would see me at 18, smiling at her, gently saying her name. The next, she would see me in that hospital bed, casually tearing our past to shreds. If our entire relationship had been a lie, if every moment was a deception, then what had the last 7 years meant? She knew people changed. She could have even accepted me becoming vain and materialistic. But she couldn't accept that the love she had given so freely had been thrown back in her face and trampled into the dirt. That was why she had said those final, cruel words, partly to protect her own shattered pride, and partly to protect the memory of the boy she had once loved. Chloe didn't sleep that night. For some reason, her own heartbeat sounded unnaturally loud in her ears. At dawn, she checked her phone and saw a message from Julian, sent in the early hours of the morning. Chloe, please don't be mad. I can explain about yesterday. I'll wait for you at our usual spot tomorrow. Chloe remembered seeing Julian push me into the river, and how she had jumped in after me. After she had pulled me out, she had been so furious that she had screamed at Julian. It was only after hearing my side of the story that she realized she had misunderstood. A pang of guilt hit her, and she quickly got in her car and drove to the restaurant. But she was exhausted from lack of sleep, and she dozed off for a second at a red light. When she opened her eyes, she saw a truck swerving out of control, heading straight for her. She was instantly wide awake. Her hands reacted before her brain could, and she wrenched the steering wheel. She managed to avoid the truck, but her car slammed into the guardrail. There was a deafening crash and then fire. The impact sent waves of pain through her body, shredding her nerves. She was covered in blood. Her vision swam in and out of focus. Dazed, she fumbled for her phone and instinctively dialed a number. After a single ring, a cold, automated voice answered, "The number you have dialed is not available. Please try again later." He didn't answer. Chloe's heart sank into a bottomless darkness. If she was going to die here, if this was her last minute on Earth, her last chance, there was only one thing she wanted to do. She then opened iMessage, found the familiar contact photo, and tapped on it. She sent a voice message, asking a single question. After she sent it, she stared at the screen for a long time, but there was no reply. It was the same cold silence as 5 years ago. So, there really was no going back for them. Realizing this, she tried to unsend the message, but too much time had passed. The option was gone. Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her face. As her consciousness faded, one last thought crossed her mind. If Ethan heard she had died, if he listened to that message, would he ever know a moment's peace for the rest of his life? As she slipped into darkness, Chloe dreamed. In her dream, she was 27, but she was back in the year she had turned 18. We had been together for 3 years then. She watched the 18-year-old version of me walk up to her and take her hand, and her heart melted all over again. She squeezed my hand, lacing our fingers together, and pulled me into an embrace so tight it felt like she was trying to absorb me into herself, to never let me go. After a moment, I was breathless. I laughed and playfully punched her arm. What's gotten into you? We're in public. Let go. She looked into my clear eyes, which reflected her own image, and felt as if life was being breathed back into a body that had grown numb and cold in my absence. She slowly loosened her grip but kept her eyes fixed on me, as if she were afraid I would vanish if she looked away. I quickly sensed that something was wrong. I stood on my toes and smoothed the worry from her brow. What is it? Did something happen to upset you? Tell me. The best boyfriend in the entire world will find a way to fix it. My smile was as warm as a spring day, and it easily melted the armor Chloe had spent 5 years building around her heart. She rested her head on my shoulder. I had a dream last night, she said, her voice hoarse. In my dream, we were 27. That's great. Were we married? Did we have that house by the sea? 2 kids? Did we take them for walks on the beach at sunset? As I described it, it was as if Chloe could see it too. A wave of sadness washed over her, and she breathed in my scent as if to steady herself. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We weren't married. My eyes widened. What? How is that possible? You're lying to me, aren't you? She saw the flicker of panic in my eyes and knew we were both thinking the same thing. If we weren't together at 27, what happened? Did we break up? She felt the truth was too cruel a burden to place on my young heart. I should be carefree, innocent, full of hope for love and the future. So she forced a smile and said playfully, yes, I was lying. We were already married. We just hadn't had the ceremony yet. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then why did we wait until we were 27 to get married? Because. The smile faded from her face, and she seemed to be talking more to herself than to me. Because I got sick. I was sick for 5 years. I had to get better before I could marry you. As if her words had summoned it, a sharp pain shot through her chest. The agony was unbearable, and she felt her soul begin to detach from her body, drifting away. Before she faded completely, she heard her 18-year-old self ask me a question. Ethan, will you love me forever? Will you never leave me? And my 18-year-old self had replied, of course. I swear on my life. When Chloe opened her eyes again, all she saw was the white wall of a hospital room. Still half in the dream, she murmured my name. Ethan, Ethan. Julian, who had been sitting by her bedside for 3 days, heard her. The joy on his face froze, replaced by anger and resentment. Chloe, look at me. Look who's here. His sharp voice finally pulled her back to reality. She looked around the room, and when she saw no one else was there, she looked at Julian. Julian, what are you doing here? He saw her eyes scanning the room, searching, and the resentment he'd been holding back for 3 days finally exploded. I'm your fiancé. Where else would I be? Who were you hoping to see? Ethan? I'll tell you right now, while you were unconscious, he didn't visit once. Not a single call, not a single text. Every word was a needle in Chloe's heart. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. It had all been a dream, and that vow sworn on my life had been a lie. She closed her eyes to hide the pain, a bitter, self-mocking smile on her lips. After a long moment, she regained her composure and opened her eyes. She looked at Julian, who was trying to hold back angry tears, and forced herself to speak. That's not what I meant. I know you've been here for 3 days, and I know how worried you were. I just wanted to tell you about what happened at the river. Before she could finish her sentence, Julian cut her off, his voice rising to a shout. If you know all that, then why is Ethan the only one you ever think about? The last person you called before you passed out was him. The last message you sent was to him. You say his name in your sleep, and the first thing you do when you wake up is look for him. Chloe, I have given you everything in this relationship. Why can't you be as devoted to me as I am to you? If you couldn't get over Ethan, you never should have started things with me. You can't be with me and still be hung up on him. It's that simple. Don't you get it? What am I to you? Your fiancé? Or just a tool to make Ethan jealous? We're getting married, and you're still obsessed with the ex who abandoned you 5 years ago. You said you wanted revenge, but that was just an excuse to see him again, wasn't it? Did you really think I didn't know? The barrage of accusations left Chloe, still weak and disoriented, completely stunned. She had never realized he had been holding in so much resentment. Thinking back on their year together, the memories were hazy, the details blurred. But her memories of me were crystal clear, every moment as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The contrast was stark, and she could no longer deny the truth. She had never loved Julian. But what about me? Did she still love me? She didn't know, and she was ashamed to even ask the question. Seeing the conflict on Chloe's face and her continued silence, Julian's anger reached its peak. He clenched his fists, dropping all pretense of being the nice guy. What is it you see in Ethan, anyway? If he's such a gold digger, why didn't he take the 100 million I offered him to leave? He just gets off on having you chase him. That's why he won't leave you alone. A disgusting person like him deserves to die. Pushing him in the river was just giving him what he deserved. I was doing it for you. How can you be mad at me? Chloe's eyes had frozen at the words 100 million. Her bloodshot eyes filled with surprise and confusion. Julian said he had offered me $100 million to leave and that he had pushed me into the river. But I had told her that I had demanded the money and that he had pushed me in when I tried to attack him. The same event, two different stories. Who was lying? As she thought, her breathing grew ragged. She quickly realized it couldn't have been Julian who was lying. With their wedding so close, he would do anything to get rid of me. He had even convinced her to fire me. It made sense that he would try to pay me off, especially after he found out she had come to see me about the necklace. So that meant I was the one who had lied. But why? If I was so obsessed with money, why would I turn down $100 million? And why would I lie about something so serious, something that had almost cost me my life? A tangled web of questions ensnared Chloe's mind. She tried to make sense of it all, forgetting about Julian, who was still fuming. Her silence only fueled his anger. Chloe, are you even listening to me? If you don't care about me, then let's just break up. We're done. His ultimatum was too much for her to handle in her fragile state. She pressed her aching temples. Julian, she said wearily, can you just give me a few days to think? He had just threatened to break up, and she wanted time to think? To Julian, her stalling was as good as an agreement. He could no longer lie to himself. Tears sprang to his eyes, and he turned and walked away. This time, Chloe didn't go after him. She picked up her phone and opened her call history. Julian had called her dozens of times since the accident. The last call she had made was to Ethan. She stared at the name for a long time, then opened iMessage. She scrolled through her unread messages until she found the conversation with Ethan. The last thing in the chat was the voice message she had sent 3 days ago. She played it, hearing her own weak, raspy voice. Ethan, I think I'm dying. Can you please, just this once, tell me the truth? Did you ever regret it? Did you ever love me? Chloe opened my Facebook profile. I had disappeared without a trace the day we broke up. In 5 years, I had only posted once, a year ago. It was a set of photos from a solo trip to Hawaii. Thinking I was still single, she had, on a whim, come to my city, bought my company, and forced me to become her secretary. I hadn't posted anything since. My cover photo was a picture of me with an elephant in Hawaii. I was smiling like I was 18 again. My bio was a single line. The rest of my life is as peaceful as a dream. She went back to our iMessage conversation and typed a long message, then deleted it. She did this several times, until all that was left were 3 words, I'm not dead. There was no reply. She grew more and more anxious. She was about to call when a nurse came in to take her for some tests. The examination room was down a long hallway. Halfway down the hall, a gurney was being wheeled towards her. As she stepped aside, she saw the human shape under the white sheet, and her heart began to race with a sudden, inexplicable panic. The sudden wave of fear was so strange that she asked the nurse, "Who is that?" The nurse glanced over, her tone somber. "A patient who passed away from a heart condition. He donated his body to science. They're taking him to the university lab." A heart condition? Chloe's eyes narrowed. She subconsciously touched her own chest. What was wrong with his heart? I'm not sure of the details. I just know he had surgery a while ago. They removed his original heart and put in an artificial one. It was nearing the end of its lifespan, and he didn't take very good care of himself. He didn't even make it the full 5 years. Chloe knew all about artificial hearts. 5 years ago, when she couldn't find a donor, she had considered getting one herself. Even if it only meant 5 more years, as long as she could spend them with me, it would be worth it. But when I found out, I had refused to even consider it, insisting that we wait for a real donor. Before she could convince me, she had discovered my affair. The shock had caused her condition to worsen dramatically, and she had been rushed into surgery that night. They had been about to give her an artificial heart when the hospital announced that a suitable donor had been found. Her parents, who had rushed to the hospital, had signed the consent forms without a moment's hesitation. The surgery was a success. The Astor family had wanted to thank the donor, but the hospital told them the donation was anonymous, from someone with no family who just wanted to help. They had no choice but to let it go. and from that day on I had vanished. For 5 years I was a ghost. New phone number, no social media, no trace. Chloe spent 5 years recovering in a private clinic in Switzerland, where she met Julian, who was studying abroad. After she fully recovered, she returned home to take over the family business. She found me through that one Facebook post, brought me back to New York, and accepted Julian's proposal. Looking back on it now, she had to admit that Julian had been right. Her reasons for being with him hadn't been pure. She hated me, yes, but underneath the hate was a pain she couldn't conceal. And the root of it all was the love she had once felt for me, a love so strong she would have done anything. The gurney clattered away down the hall. A gust of wind from an open window lifted a corner of the white sheet, revealing the peaceful face of the deceased. Chloe had already looked away. She didn't see it. After her tests, the doctor told her she had only sustained external injuries, but that she would need to stay in the hospital for a month to recover. She was about to object when her parents, who had just arrived, began to scold her. "What is it now? You're marrying Julian in 2 months. You need to rest and get better." At the word wedding, Chloe's heart skipped a beat, and a wave of resistance washed over her. She had only agreed to the marriage a few months ago because she was tired of her parents' nagging. But after a near-death experience, she suddenly felt that a life not lived on her own terms was a life not worth living. And besides, after what Julian had said, she knew she couldn't marry him. She didn't love him, and it wouldn't be fair. So, she took a deep breath and said, "I've spoken with Julian. We're not ready to spend the rest of our lives together. We're calling off the wedding." Her parents were furious. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? This wedding is tied to the merger between Astor and Croft. This isn't some childish game you can just call off. You are the CEO of the Astor Group. You need to remember your responsibilities. 5 years ago, you nearly died for Ethan. Are you going to make the same mistake again? Did Ethan say something to you? Did he try to cause trouble between you and Julian? I told you to let that gold-digging parasite rot, but you had to bring him back, make him your secretary, and throw money at him. Do you call that revenge? What has he lost?" Chloe's face grew pale under their barrage of questions. She wanted to defend herself, but a wave of weariness washed over her. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice firm. "I've made my decision. It's not up for discussion. As CEO, I will take full responsibility for the consequences. You don't need to worry." Seeing her determination, her father began to tremble with rage. "Fine. You're all grown up now, aren't you? 5 years ago, you cut us off for him without a second thought. Now we ask you to do this one simple thing and you refuse. What's the matter? Are you afraid to bet on him? Afraid you'll lose?" Her words threw Chloe's already chaotic thoughts into further disarray. Her heart was pounding, but her face remained impassive. She looked at her phone on the nightstand. "I'll only make this bet once in my life," she said quietly. "And I'll accept the outcome, win or lose." Her mother took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. "Fine. If you want to call it off, let's make a bet. We have 1 month. I will transfer $300 million into Ethan's account, with the note that he is to disappear from your life forever. If he takes the money and doesn't leave, or if he contacts you even once, I lose. You can call off the wedding, you can marry him, we won't stand in your way." Chloe's head snapped up. She stared at her parents in disbelief. They had said they wouldn't stand in our way. For a second, she thought she must be dreaming. But after the initial shock, a sense of urgency took over. She asked for the rest of the terms. "In return," her mother said, "you will stay in this hospital for 1 month. You cannot leave. And you cannot, under any circumstances, contact Ethan or let him know about this bet. If you do, you lose. If he takes the money and leaves, or if he stays in the city but doesn't contact you, you lose. You will marry Julian, and you will forget Ethan forever. His life or death will be no concern of yours." It felt like an earthquake was erupting in Chloe's chest. She couldn't imagine what would happen if she won, and she couldn't bear to think about what would happen if she lost. In that moment, she saw my 18-year-old face from her dream and heard my vow echoing in her ears. As if in a trance, she heard herself say, "I agree." Seeing her long hesitation, her father sneered. "You've been waiting to hear those words for almost 10 years, haven't you? 5 years ago, you were ready to die for him, ready to cut us off without a second thought. Now all he has to do is contact you once and you win, and still you hesitate. Are you that afraid you'll lose?" His words threw her already chaotic thoughts into further disarray. She stared at her phone on the nightstand. "I'll only make this bet once in my life," she said quietly. "And I'll accept the outcome, win or lose." With those words, her parents finally relaxed. They called in security, installed cameras throughout her wing of the hospital, confiscated all of her devices, and posted a guard at her door with a strict visitor log. Once everything was in place, her mother showed her a screenshot confirming the $300 million transfer. After Chloe nodded her confirmation, her mother started a 30-day countdown timer. Tick, tock, thump, thump. Chloe's heart beat in time with the clock on the wall, never missing a second. Trapped in that small room with no way to contact the outside world, time crawled by. Every noise, a footstep in the hall, a crowd on the street below, the chirping of a bird, sent a jolt of nervous energy through her. She was on edge, startled by every sound, yet a part of her was waiting, hoping. The days ticked by. 30 became 25, then 20, then 15. A few friends came to visit, but she was in no mood for company. Knowing she was being watched, she kept the visits brief. Julian came 3 times, but she refused to see him. On the 10th day, an old classmate came to visit. "Chloe," she said, "remember that fundraiser for our alma mater? The university used the money to build a new science wing. They're having a dedication ceremony for the centennial celebration. They want all the major donors to be there for a photo op. You'll be there, right?" Chloe remembered the fundraiser. The Astor family were well-known philanthropists, and she had made a substantial donation. The centennial was a major event, and she knew she should be there. She agreed and asked for the date. Her friend waved a hand dismissively. "I know you're busy. I'll text you the day of. Just come if you can." After a bit more small talk, her friend got up to leave. "Last I heard, you and Julian were getting married," she said. "When's the big day? I want to make sure I get you a gift in time." Chloe's heart, which had finally settled, gave a hard thump. She glanced at the countdown timer on the wall, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "It's been postponed," she said. "It might be cancelled." A few more days passed. 10 became 9. The days seemed to be speeding up. Her body was healing, but her nerves were frayed. She would jolt awake several times a night and sit in the dark, watching the clock until dawn. When the countdown reached 3 days, she asked for a 1-hour pause to check her phone and the visitor log. Her parents agreed, even bringing her the phone and the logbook themselves. Under their calm gaze, she unlocked her phone. It was working perfectly. There were dozens of unread messages and missed calls, but none from Ethan. She scanned the visitor log again and again, but his name wasn't there. The hope she had been clinging to vanished. She said nothing, simply handed the items back and returned to her chair, her eyes fixed on the countdown. 3 days became 2, then 1. She didn't relax for a second. In the final 60 seconds, she heard footsteps hurrying down the hall. Like someone grasping at a final straw, she dragged her weak body to the door. The timer hit 0, and the door opened. But it wasn't the person she had been waiting for. It was Julian. He said only 2 words, "You lost." The dawning realization hit her like a blizzard, burying her completely. She stood frozen, a statue of despair. Her bloodshot eyes were wild, her pale face trembled, and a single, grief-stricken word escaped her lips. "Why?" It was a question for the man who never came, and a question for herself. Why had she made this bet when she should have known the outcome? Why had she held out hope for the man who had destroyed her? Was $300 million really worth more than 12 years of history? More than a lifetime together? Was she worth so little to him? Utter devastation couldn't begin to describe how she felt. She felt all the strength drain from her body. The world went black and she collapsed. When she woke, her parents were by her bedside. "Chloe, a bet's a bet. Ethan is a heartless, money-grubbing bastard. It's time you finally saw him for what he is. Let him go. Be with Julian. We're meeting with the Crofts tonight to finalize the wedding plans. You will be there." Chloe said nothing. As her parents continued to talk, her phone buzzed. It was her classmate, reminding her that the university's centennial celebration was today. Feeling suffocated, she used it as an excuse to leave. The campus was buzzing with a festive energy for the centennial. Chloe stood in the familiar main quad, looking at the tree-lined paths, the library, the pond. She saw memories of us everywhere. Watching the students, so full of life, she couldn't help but think of the past, and a heavy sadness settled over her. The dean led the tour, taking them first to the new science wing. The alumni donations had funded its construction. This was the medical school section. As the largest donor, Chloe was meant to be at the front of the group, but her head was spinning, and she fell behind, getting lost in the crowd. They entered a long hallway. Halfway down, a gurney was being wheeled towards them. As she stepped aside, she saw the human shape under the white sheet, and her heart began to race with a sudden, inexplicable panic. She asked the tour guide, "Who is that?" The guide's tone was somber. "An anatomical donor who passed away from a heart condition. He donated his body for medical education." A heart condition? Chloe's eyes narrowed. The man who had supposedly taken $300 million and vanished was now only a few feet away from her. But she couldn't bring herself to step closer. She felt like she was in a nightmare. Why does that face look exactly like his? Why are his eyes closed? Why is he in a glass tank? Why does the plaque call him an anatomical gift? She told herself again and again that it was just a medical dummy, that Ethan had taken the money and was starting a new life somewhere. He was fine. He had survived skydiving, a car crash, being pushed into a river. How could he be dead? But the murmurs of the crowd crashed down on her like boulders. "Chloe, is that your ex-boyfriend, Ethan? He seemed fine when I saw him last month. How did this happen? He didn't look well then. He was so thin and he had no color. It must have been sudden. He was only 27, so young." Every word was a dagger, piercing the fragile wall of denial she had built around herself. She grabbed the dean's arm, her eyes pleading. "What is this? Tell them the truth." The dean looked confusedly at the head of the medical school. The head of the medical school consulted his notes. "This is a recent anatomical gift. The donor signed the agreement with our university before he passed. We are honoring his wish to use his body for medical education." An agreement for medical education. Every word was a knife in Chloe's heart. She couldn't accept it. She lunged at the man, her fist connecting with his face. "You're lying. Ethan can't be dead. He was too selfish to ever donate his body." Her voice broke, and she collapsed into sobs. Someone handed her a file. "He's telling the truth. Here's the agreement he signed 2 months ago, and the death certificate from a month ago." Chloe's eyes fell on the familiar signature on the agreement, then on the date of death, December 19th. She remembered that day, the day she had heard his cruelest words, and had turned her back on him, saying, "From this moment on, you and I are done. We will never see each other again." Her angry words had become a prophecy. They really would never see each other again. The world went silent. The sounds of the crowd faded away, and her vision blurred. She couldn't hear anything. All she could see was my body, suspended in the clear fluid. Only one thought remained in her mind. She had to take me away from here, somewhere no one could ever find us, where they would never be parted again. She lunged forward, smashing the glass tank with all her might. Fluid and glass sprayed everywhere as the crowd screamed and scattered. But Chloe reached through the broken glass, her hands bleeding, and gathered me into her arms. The only man she had ever loved, her first love who had promised to marry her, the ex-boyfriend who had abandoned her, the secretary who had endured her cruelty. She carried me out of the room, out of the building, past the horrified onlookers, and into the street, only to realize she had nowhere to go. The skyscrapers, the neon lights, the endless traffic, it was all a maze, and she was trapped. Her strength gave out, and she collapsed in the middle of the street. The crowd that had followed her from the university surrounded them. Her parents asked if she had gone mad. "I've been mad for a long time," she replied. Julian asked if the wedding was off. "The only groom I ever wanted to marry," she said, "is right here in my arms." A professor from the medical school warned that my body would begin to decompose if it wasn't properly cared for. "Then let us rot," she said. "I will be buried with him." After dark, Chloe regained some of her strength and began the long walk home, carrying me in her arms. Their destination was the small apartment they had rented 6 years ago, when they were just starting out. After I left, she had bought the entire building, but she had never once set foot inside. The overflowing dumpster by the door, the creaking wooden stairs, the chalk drawings on the brick wall, everything was just as it had been. But the man who used to walk her home, holding her hand, now lay silent and still in her arms. Chloe stayed in that small apartment for 3 days. I lay on the bed where they had once dreamed of their future, looking as if I were only sleeping. She sat beside me, holding my cold, thin hand, and the storm that had been raging inside her for years finally began to calm. On the 3rd morning, sunlight streamed through the dusty window. Chloe pulled herself to her feet, went to the door, and spoke to the guards stationed outside. "Guard this apartment. No one enters without my permission." She walked unsteadily down the stairs and went to a small diner down the street for breakfast. She hadn't been there in years, but the food tasted just the same. After she ate, she went to the hospital and requested all of my medical records. She read through them, her expression calm, until she reached the last page. "Cause of death, heart failure." Her fingers trembled, and a sharp, tearing pain shot through her own chest. She bit her lip, a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. It was as if the fate that was meant for her had been transferred to someone else. She laughed at the cruel irony of it all, and at her younger self for fighting so hard to live. If she had died at 22, would I have been spared her fate? Would I have lived to be an old man and found someone who truly loved me? She laughed until she cried. For the first time in her life, she understood that living could be a kind of agony. The doctor sighed. The patient removed his own monitors before he passed. We didn't realize for 10 minutes. We tried to resuscitate him 3 times, but it was too late. We couldn't find any next of kin, and our records showed he was an orphan who had signed a donation agreement, so we contacted the university. He had an artificial heart from a surgery 5 years ago. We removed it before the transfer. I don't know the details beyond that. The doctor's voice trailed off. Chloe's head snapped up, her teeth chattering. What artificial heart? What surgery? 5 years ago. The doctor nodded and handed her a yellowed file. We found it in the archives. He anonymously donated his heart 5 years ago. Afterwards, he was fitted with an artificial heart with a 5-year operational lifespan. The doctor's words struck her like a bolt of lightning. A bone-deep chill washed over her, and she felt as if the blood was freezing in her veins. With a trembling hand, she pulled at the collar of her shirt, revealing the faint, silvery line of a scar. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath her palm. The heart that was keeping her alive had come from the man she had spent the last 5 years hating. She remembered how I had sat by her bedside for a week, my eyes swollen from crying. She remembered how I had run myself ragged between the hospital and work, collapsing from exhaustion more than once. She remembered how I had vehemently rejected the idea of an artificial heart, insisting that they wait for a real donor. How could she have forgotten all that, all because of one staged affair? How had she not seen the holes in my story? How had she not questioned the timing of my disappearance? Why had she never tried to find out who the anonymous donor was? She asked herself these questions again and again, but there were no answers. They had been together for 7 years. I had told her I loved her 1,000 times, and she hadn't believed me, but she had believed that one transparent lie. She had hated me for 5 years, tormented me, thinking she could make me regret what I'd done, all while my life was ticking away. And even at the end, I had endured the pain, telling her lies, all so she could hate me enough to move on without guilt. She, who had thought herself so full of love, had been the one to betray it. And he, who had denied his love, had given her his youth, his heart, his future, his very life. Chloe woke up 3 days later. She stared at the 4 drip, her eyes vacant. Her parents were by her side, their eyes red-rimmed. "Chloe, you're awake." The doctors gave us 3 critical condition notices. We were so scared. Hearing their choked voices, she looked at them, her eyes still unfocused. "If I die," she said, "bury me with Ethan. He gave his life so you could live. You can't give up on yourself," her mother cried. "His heart is still beating inside you. He's with you. He's watching over you from heaven, and he would want you to live a full life, for both of you." They pleaded with her for a long time, but Chloe didn't hear a word. Do people really have souls? Is there really a heaven? If there was, could they be together again? A bodyguard interrupted them. "Ms. Astor, there's a smell coming from the apartment you had us guard. What are your instructions?" Chloe ripped the 4 from her arm, ready to go herself. Her parents rushed to stop her. "We'll take care of it. You just had surgery, you need to rest. We'll find the best cemetery plot, hold a beautiful memorial service. We'll make sure he rests in peace." The numbness on Chloe's face finally broke. 6 years ago, you wouldn't let me marry him. Now, you won't even let me take care of his body. He never knew your kindness when he was alive. Do you think he can rest in peace now, with you putting on this show? Her parents' faces went pale. The hatred in her eyes was like a dagger to their hearts, and they staggered back. Chloe broke free from their grasp and walked out. When she got back to the apartment, Julian was there. He looked at her, his expression complicated. "Chloe." Chloe didn't give him a chance to speak. She pushed past him, went inside, and carried my body out. She took me to a funeral home. 2 hours later, the man who had once been so full of life was reduced to a box of ashes. She returned to the apartment with the urn and found an old wallet tucked away in a drawer. Inside was my college ID photo. I was young, with a smile as bright as spring. She gently touched the photo, but all she felt was the cold plastic. Chloe chose a beautiful plot at Greenwood Cemetery. She searched the apartment, my old place, my office at work, but couldn't find a single thing of mine to bury. In the end, the only thing she had was the necklace I had returned. She knelt on the ground and laid the bricks herself, building my final resting place with her own hands. The epitaph she had carved on the stone was the question from her dream, and my answer from all those years ago. Will you love me forever? Will you never leave me? Of course, I swear on my life. Beneath the words, she had both of our names carved, like a contract meant to last for eternity. She didn't buy flowers. Instead, she planted the plot with aspen trees. She had heard they could live for thousands of years, long enough to stand guard over the vow carved in stone. She stayed at the cemetery until dusk, the setting sun stretching her shadow long across the grass. As the last light faded, Julian arrived. He knelt before the headstone and bowed his head to the ground 3 times. Chloe's voice was calm. Don't come here again. Ethan wouldn't want to see you. Julian flinched, his voice thick with guilt. I just wanted to apologize. I believed the rumors that he had abandoned you. I used my position as your fiancé to get my own petty revenge. I was wrong, so wrong. But Chloe was lost in her own grief. She was the one who was truly to blame. If she hadn't forced me to come back to New York, if she hadn't made me her secretary, if she hadn't stood by and let Julian torment me, my last year wouldn't have been filled with such humiliation. I wouldn't have been denied even a peaceful death. She looked at Julian, her decision made. Tomorrow, I will publicly announce the cancellation of our engagement. The merger between Astor and Croft is terminated. The Astor Group will not be liable for any of the Croft Corporation's losses. Julian had expected this. He accepted it calmly. He knew he could never compete with my memory. He knew he would never be her husband. After leaving the cemetery, Chloe went back to her office and had her assistant draw up a complete list of her personal assets and holdings. The next day, she called a press conference. In front of the live cameras, she first announced the end of her engagement. Then, she announced the formation of a new charitable foundation named the Ethan Foundation, to which she was donating her entire personal fortune. The news was instantly the top trending story, sending shockwaves through the city's elite. Before she had even stepped down from the podium, her phone was blowing up with calls from her family. She didn't answer a single one. They, who valued power and money above all else, deserved to feel what it was like to lose everything. When the press conference was over, she saw her parents waiting for her at the door. They looked older, their hair grayer, leaning on each other for support. Chloe, her father asked, where are you going? Chloe looked at them, her voice tired. I thought you'd ask if I've gone insane. We're not angry, her mother said. We just want to take you home. I haven't had a home for a long time, Chloe cut them off. When I was 21, you were the ones who disowned me, who threw me out. From that day on, our relationship has been nothing but a transaction. Would you have taken me back when I was sick if your precious nephew hadn't been such a disappointment? Would you have handed me the company if you weren't getting old and losing your grip? You say you gave me life twice. I've repaid you for the first. The second came from Ethan. It has nothing to do with you. She tore away the sweet facade of family to reveal the bitter truth. When she had tried to start her own business, the deals that fell through, the contracts with hidden clauses, the pressure from all sides, it had all been their doing, a coordinated effort to force her to come crawling back. That was why she had worked herself to the point of collapse, why her heart had failed. It all started with them. With everything settled, Chloe returned to the small apartment. Before putting the key in the lock, she knocked softly on the door, just as she had done 5 years ago. Ethan, she called out gently, I'm home. The empty room offered no reply. She pushed the door open, turned on the rusty faucet, and began to clean the dusty apartment. As she worked, she spoke to the silence. You always hated cleaning. You always insisted on cooking, said my food was terrible. You promised to teach me how to make your mother's recipes, remember? Is that promise still good? I did the laundry, so don't forget to change your slippers when you get in. When I'm done, maybe we can watch a movie. There's a new one out I think you'd like. She talked until her throat was dry, the only answer the steady beat of the heart in her chest. It was the last secret I had left her. When she was done cleaning, she went downstairs and bought takeout and wine from my favorite little spot. She put on an old movie, placing an empty chair beside her. She rested her hand on the back of it, as if I were sitting there. By the time the movie ended, her glass was empty. She cleaned up the takeout containers, then opened the remaining bottles of wine and poured them all out onto the floor. Then she took a shower, changed into a pair of old pajamas, and lay down on the small bed. Moonlight streamed through the grimy window, falling on the box of ashes she had placed on the nightstand. Outside, it began to snow. Chloe suddenly remembered a snowy night, long ago, when I had asked her, "Chloe, do you like winter or summer better?" She had laughed, holding me close. "Winter. When it's cold, you have to cuddle with me." I had playfully swatted her, and then had to coax her until she stopped pouting and asked me the same question. 6 years later, my voice seemed to echo across time, whispering in her ear, "I like winter too. The first time I saw you was in the winter. It was snowing the day you told me you loved me. That's why I'll always love the winter." She turned her head toward the sound, but the room was empty. It took her a moment to realize it wasn't a dream. It was just memory, sharpened by longing. Chloe opened her phone and went to my old Facebook page. She stared for a long time at the cover photo from Hawaii and the bio. "The rest of my life is as peaceful as a dream." On a whim, she searched for the phrase online. The search results brought up the lyrics to a song, and the second line made her freeze. "With this letter, I bid you an eternal farewell." The song was 4 minutes and 49 seconds long. She listened to it over and over, sobbing uncontrollably. She finally understood. It was my last message to her. He was afraid she would take her own life if she ever learned the truth. He wanted to tell her that there was still hope, that even in death he would love her, and that she had to live. But I had forgotten one thing. She loved me too. How could she possibly live on without me? When the last tear had fallen, Chloe lit a match. As the flames roared to life around her, she clutched the box of ashes to her chest and closed her eyes. From that moment on, we would never be apart again.